It happened. Something many of you have been asking for. There's now a Stories with Traction course. In this course, I show you how to properly set up a story bank, and I share strategic storytelling concepts to help you boost your sales, enhance your marketing, and position you to create a vibrant company culture. If you're interested, check out the link in the show notes. Now, on to the podcast. Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt ZAUN. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. Let's talk about sharing your stories and empowering your team to share their stories when it comes to sales, specifically on LinkedIn. I'm excited for this conversation because I am going to be talking to Rachel Simon again. For those of you who aren't familiar, Rachel Simon's been on the podcast numerous times. The reason is actually twofold. One, I really appreciate the conversations. I have a ton of fun, but also the downloads really show me that people really like what Rachel has to say, and I want to explore more of what we have been talking about. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Rachel Simon is the founder and CEO of Connect the Dots Digital, where she focuses on LinkedIn corporate strategy and how companies can utilize the platform with their employees for maximum results. Welcome back, Rachel.
Hi, Matt. Always great to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, and thanks again for your time. I really appreciate our conversations, and I think that we start with an idea and we're able to unpack numerous elements. Last conversation that we had, which I highly recommend people check that episode out. Actually, pause this episode, go check out the last one. I think this one will make a lot more sense to you from the listener perspective. But the last episode, we talked about evergreen content and the positioning of that content. We talked about just the sheer importance of showing up. And then also we started to dive into the sales pipeline strategy surrounding LinkedIn. So I'm very happy that we can explore more about the sales pipeline process and talk about that on a much deeper level. So that's what I really want to start out with today. And I think that this is on a lot of leaders' minds because I do see that there is a tide that is starting to turn. And what I mean is, there used to be a mentality of throwing enough mud up on the wall and seeing what sticks, going into different businesses, whether it's giving donuts or whatever it is to get the foot in the door. But leaders know that takes a ton of time for their sales reps to be doing. And it's not as strategic as it could be. So a lot of leaders are turning to LinkedIn to share their stories to really make those connections. So let's talk about that. From a sales pipeline perspective, for leaders that are open-minded and they are willing to start the process of getting something together with the idea that this will turn into something great, where would you recommend a leader start, at least to set the groundwork for setting up a sales pipeline process as it pertains to LinkedIn?
Yeah, you got to start at the foundation, and the foundational aspect for everything on LinkedIn is a profile. So having the understanding that throughout the organization, it's important to have that consistent brand messaging across all of the teams and profiles, right? So making sure everyone's describing the company in the same way, having that consistency, giving them the opportunity to utilize branded banner images. And you can't mandate this stuff because it's their it's individual profiles. However, you can make it easy and accessible so that your team can do it without a lot of, it's not a lot of work for them. It's not heavy lifting. You're basically serving up that branding on a silver platter. For the sales team in particular, starting with the leadership who's running that team, getting them to see that you can't really start doing outreach and pushing yourself out and the services of the products that your company offers before you build that foundation, right? I mean, again, I've used this analogy in episodes in the past, but you can't serve a can of Coca-Cola in a different color can. It's confusing to the buyer. So, right, we want to make sure that we build that strong foundation so that when the sales teams really start utilizing LinkedIn, whether they're using the free, platform premium, or if they've upgraded to Sales Navigator, that's going to work better for them in the long run.
Yeah, and I don't want people to miss this, because I think that a lot of people may think this is so simplistic and it's so potentially pointless. And I don't want people to miss that. Okay, so the build foundation, what I'm taking away is a unity and a profile. And this is almost like the pointless piece. Like, there's so many leaders that are like, what is the point of that? Why should we put resources and time into doing that? Those are the individuals that really don't understand the math of the LinkedIn piece. And it's amazing to me, because a lot of times when I go out and I'm doing strategic storytelling workshops, people say, "Oh, I'm a numbers person. I don't share stories." Well, if you were truly a numbers person, you would understand the power of stories, and you'd be sharing more stories because you would see it leading to more numbers that you are alluding to. So as an example, and ties into what Rachel's saying, is putting out content is going to drive more impressions, more views on your content, which is going to get people on your profile, which is going to lead to inbound messages, which is going to lead to sales, right? So it's just simple math. You have 1 million impressions, it's going to be different than when you have 10 million impressions, which is going to be different. Keep it going up, but then there's that tier down. That's part of the sales funnel. If your unity in the profile is discombobulated, it's not going to bode well for you as an organization. That's why I really appreciate just the simple idea of building that foundation and the importance of doing that, Rachel, because I'm sure that you can point to organizations that aren't doing this well, and the messaging is all over the place, right?
Yes, it's confusing. And just think about it from the user perspective, the customer perspective. So sales rep over here reaches out to me on LinkedIn through a connection request, but I don't understand what they do based on their headline and what the company name is. So as the target, I have to now go to their profile, read through everything, try to understand what their company does. Is it something that I need? And if their profile is really incomplete, then I got to go to the website and do all that. That's a lot of work for me. And maybe I'm just going to say, forget it. Versus if your headline's super, super clear, and I can tell right away that you understand the problem that I have and how to solve my problem, then I'm going to accept your connection request, and we can start the process of building a relationship, potentially have that, turn into a sale for you. So it's really making it as easy as possible on the consumer side so that your sales team works smarter, right? It's such a cliche, right? To work smarter, not harder, but it's a cliche because it's true, right? We want to make things as easy as possible for our potential customers so that the sales process is simple.
Yeah, no, I love the idea of don't create more work for your prospects. I think that is something everyone should recognize. Sometimes us doing something creates another problem, right? So, we put out an incredibly engaging article, which might solve different things. It's more solution oriented, but it creates a problem, because the problem is, what does the reader do now? Do they message you? Do they what do they do, right? So that's the problem. We need to make sure that it is as easy as possible, and building that unity is going to help at least position the company to do that. There's a gentleman that I have been connected with for quite some time. He is one of the nicest human beings. I'm not even going to say his name because I don't want it to come across as I'm talking down on him. But he figured out a way to go viral often. Okay. So he figured out a way to post content that really goes viral quite often, meaning massive, massive engagement. I have no idea what he wants me to do as a prospect, because he does a bunch of stuff. but I don't even really quite understand what he does. I know some elements of what he does, but it's not crystal clear to me. And that really speaks to your point, Rachel, is that this should be easy for our prospects to know what to do once we start to build a relationship through our content. Where do they go from there? So I very much appreciate you mentioning that. I also want to talk about just the importance of maybe not even getting the kind of engagement that we want, but what it could lead to. You mentioned to me, we spoke months ago about lurkers, right? So I want you to talk a little bit about that, about, for people that aren't as familiar with LinkedIn, what would a lurker be to you?
Yeah. Uh, that's like the inside baseball lingo in the LinkedIn training world, the lurkers. A lurker would be somebody who is only going to read content, will never engage. They'll never like, they'll never react, they'll never comment on a post, but they log on. They log on regularly and they read the news feed and they're paying attention. So every year, a gentleman based in Europe named Richard Vanderblom puts together an amazing LinkedIn algorithm report. It usually comes out like in the fall. And so in the most recent one that came out at the end of 2022, the stat was that 61% of LinkedIn users read only.
Wow.
So they're only reading content. They are never engaging with content. So that's when if you're a content creator, that's when you'll come across people, when you're out and about in the real world, who's like, I see you all the time on LinkedIn, and they've never engaged with your content. I guarantee you have people like that. Those are the lurkers. They're paying attention, they're reading, they see you. And then when they need you, they know where to go.
So I ran into actually a high school classmate. This is a few months ago. And this person knew way more about my business than I ever thought. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, where in the world does this person know all this stuff? Like, this person knew all the engagements I had, where I've been all these different things. And he just said, Matt, I follow you on LinkedIn. This person's never commented, never liked, none of that. But yet he really knew my business. So question for you, obviously, Rachel, you and I, we go on LinkedIn. We love networking, building relationships. You and I met through LinkedIn. And I mean, think of all the episodes that we've had. Just a lot of positive has come to that. So I know why you and I show up on LinkedIn, but why would a lurker show up on LinkedIn in the first place? What are they doing there?
I think they're trying to, take a pulse of what's happening in their network, keep up with trends, sort of, it's like the town square. What's going on today on LinkedIn? Some people are really keep up with what the trending news stories are. So, if you're on the home screen, on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the LinkedIn stories that the LinkedIn news editors are highlighting. So it's a place to get the latest on industry news, who's engaging with that content. They might be looking for people to follow. So, I think of myself as a lurker on Twitter, right? I'll read through Twitter, I'll scroll through Twitter. Occasionally I'll engage with a tweet here and there, but I think I've tweeted like a handful of times, and probably a majority of them are like retweeting stuff from the Atlanta Braves. Beyond that, I am a lurker on Twitter. I'm just there to kind of see what's going on, be entertained, and maybe learn something.
So that's really good for people to recognize. All right. So if lurkers are going there to learn, to have that entertainment, to be able to check out for a few minutes a day and scroll, we really need to make sure that we're speaking to their pain points. And that all goes back to the who is in your network and how to speak to them. And we touched on this in the last episode, but the idea, I had mentioned Aaron Geiger saying to me, ICP/C, ideal client persona/community, right? Who is our community and how do we speak to them? So let's talk about that a little bit, because there is a strategy with that, right? So once someone identifies their sales pipeline process, where they say, okay, it normally takes just to use a random example, 6 months to take a prospect to a client. Here are the stages along the way within those 6 months. Here are the amount of touch points. Here's what needs to be done, whether it comes to messaging, emails, phone calls. Now they can incorporate LinkedIn as part of that strategy, and a part of that's the content piece, but being intentional, making sure the stories we're sharing through that content relate and connect to our target community. So is there anything that you could talk about regarding to focus on and also to stay away from as it pertains to sharing stories with our community?
Well, I think before we think about what stories we're sharing, we want to make sure we know who we're sharing them to, right? So who's in our network, who is in that audience? And I think that's really almost more relevant today than, 5, 6, 10 years ago. Because, these days people are changing their career paths a lot more frequently than in the past, right? You're shifting industries. I shifted from, nonprofit into, being a business owner. People move around a lot. So the network that I started building when I joined LinkedIn in 2011, when I worked in nonprofit, is a lot different than my audience today. There is overlap because a lot of the people that I initially connected with are people in my community because I was super, I worked for a community organization. So the stakeholders, the donors, the volunteers, this, that, and the other, a lot of them happen to be, professionals in Metro Atlanta. However, I also had people who were just working in nonprofit. Now, maybe they would be customers for me today, but maybe not. Other people shift complete industries. So they have maybe in one, they used to work in manufacturing and now they're working in something completely different. So you have to be continuously understanding who's in your network and realize for two reasons. One, you're shifting, but they're shifting too. So there might be people in your network that when you connected with them were in one vertical and now they're potentially a target or referral partner for you. But if you forgot about them, you're not going to know that. Or you may have like these massive gaps in your network where you need to be connecting with people in this industry because that's who you're targeting these days. So there's a really easy way to do this. And we've talked about evergreen content. This is one of my evergreen content pieces, which is how to download your LinkedIn network. So you can download it directly from LinkedIn. You get it as a spreadsheet. You can sort it and then spend a little bit of time just figuring out who the heck is in there. Are there some people I need to re-engage with, or do I need to be building in certain areas?
That's really interesting. All right. So, 100% people know that our career/business might change, but we also need to be mindful of our community. I really appreciate the example you mentioned on how, your career path changed. Right now, you have a business that you're helping a ton of people with this corporate LinkedIn strategy, but yet your community over here might have different pain points. And there is some overlap, like you mentioned, but I see all the time there are people that they're speaking to their older audience, not generationally speaking, but their audience from a previous life, so to speak, when they're in a different role. They might have gone from a VP to C-suite, and they're still talking like they're talking to managers when there should be more focused on the strategy and the leadership element. This happens all the time. And then they wonder why they can't connect with their communities because they're speaking to that older past community. So what are some things outside of the download? So I understand they could download, they can kind of pick through, they can figure that out. But from a sheer messaging strategy, where do they go from there?
Yeah, I think it's identifying of who that audience is and what do they want to hear from you, right? So if you need to be speaking to the pain points of this community, what are those pain points, right? What are the stories that you can share that's going to break through the noise and get them to identify as somebody who, cares about what you have to say. So figuring that out, right? Because again, I spent a lot of time in my career working in nonprofit. I have a lot of stories I could share from that, but is that relevant to my audience today? Maybe a small part of them, but not broadly.
That's a really good point. And sometimes even if it's okay to share, we have to ask ourselves, should we be sharing that story? And sometimes that's really tough. There have been stories that I have written out. I'm so excited about it. And then I realize more than likely this was going to alienate some people, and it's not going to really help me when it comes to expanding my vision and mission with what I want to do in business. So I just end up either deleting it, or I put it off, almost as this was really interesting and fun to write, but I'm not going to do anything with it. Right. And that's
Yeah.
painful. That's painful, especially when I personally feel like it's fun. It's funny. Sometimes it's exciting. I'm excited about it. So sometimes I'll just text it to a friend, or I'll tell my wife, but I know it might not really be relatable to my community and my audience.
Yeah. And I want to go back to the sales piece of it, right? And like, what can sales team members, how can they implement things like this? And I think that what my advice is always to remember that your content is about your audience. So your company may have the greatest product in the world, but does your audience care about that, right? What is the problem your audience solves? I mean, has that your product can solve. So when you come at it from the vantage point of it's not about you, it's about them, that applies also to your about section on your profile. It's not about you, it's about your audience. It needs to be relevant to your customer, to who you want to get in front of, versus talking all about you. So I think when you think about content from that perspective, that it's not about, hey, let's talk about this great new product launch. Yeah, you should talk about your product launch, but you should talk about it from the vantage point of your customer and why it solves their problem, not about the features of that product launch.
I love that. Let's dive deeper. I want to talk about authenticity and humor for a second. Okay. So we've talked about, Rachel, in the past about, authenticity, super buzzwordy type thing on, of course, people want real, honest people. They want people to be authentic. I do think, I hate to say this, and it's just going to sound bad, but let me kind of explain why I'm saying this. There is a little bit of strategy when it comes to authenticity. And what I mean by that is, sometimes people share things that are just going to alienate their community. It just is. I mean, I see, and again, that goes into what we talked about on the last episode, was the difference between passion versus profit, right? Like, we want that high, we want that dopamine hit, we want to go viral, we want to be like mini famous, so to speak. And sometimes I see people post things that it's so raw, it's so authentic, it's so real and deep, and sometimes that does need to be shared. I just want people to ask themselves, is it truly going to connect with their audience or not? If it's not, they might want to share that with their counselor. And I'm not saying that in a nasty way. I'm very pro counseling. It's just, you know what I mean? Like, it gets to the point where, are you really going to alienate your audience by doing so? So let's start with that, and then we'll rope in the humor piece.
So I think the example that comes to mind for me was it was a couple months ago, that crying CEO guy. I don't know what his name is, but you know who I'm talking about.
I don't know by name, but I definitely know the
And I think, again, his intent was like to show how heartbroken he was that he had to lay off a bunch of people. And he posted a selfie of him with like tears running down his face and this whole big long post. And he got completely just destroyed in the comments from people who just thought it was so self-serving, that he was just trying to go viral. I don't know what his motivation was. I have no idea. But I think that's a great example of, was that the best decision? Maybe not. I mean, I think he had to do a lot of backpedaling to kind of recover from that. And I have no idea if that person is still on LinkedIn or not, but maybe that was better to be sent to like his best friend to say how broken up he was about having to lay people off in his company versus going public like that.
All right. Yeah. Let's talk about that specific example, because I think it's a good example, at least to point to. So just to give people an idea what Rachel is talking about, is this, when she says that it blew up in the comments, this went radically viral. Okay. So for the people listening not aware of this, it went so viral that news publications picked it up. He ended up being on shows, and it was almost a tour of shame. The negative blowback from this video, or I think it was a picture. It was a picture with
It was a
text from this.
selfie.
It was a
Yeah.
selfie with him crying, was more than he probably bargained for. Now, I don't want leaders to be scared of sharing their stories on LinkedIn. Obviously, Rachel and I have done numerous episodes of the importance of doing so. The problem, I believe, and I don't know this person personally, I've never had a personal conversation with him, but my thought is maybe he thought, okay, vulnerability, authenticity tends to do well. I'm going to get a ton of likes, and people are going to see the heart that I have as a leader regarding laying people off. It did not work with his community. And even once it went viral, it didn't really work with anyone the way he presented his case. So I do think we really need to ask ourselves, even if it would end up going viral, is it really worth it? I've had 9 posts now go viral, meaning they've radically expanded far superior to the following I have. That's the way I quantify viral. So for simple math, someone has 10,000 followers and it's seen by 100,000, that went mini viral in a sense that it exceeded their following. I've not gotten one single business deal from any of my 9 posts that have gone viral. However, I've gotten numerous clients from posts that have gotten 2 comments because it was hyper focused to that individual. I end up getting a message. We hop on a discovery call and the sale is landed. It's closed. Right. So I think it's really important for people to recognize that you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you really feel bad about posting something.
Yeah. And I think, I appreciate you kind of clarifying that, leaders shouldn't be afraid to be vulnerable and they shouldn't be afraid to share their stories. This was just an example that I think went off the rails a little bit to a certain extent, and unfortunate for this individual because I truly, and I don't know this person either who posted it, but I think that their intention was good, but it was sometimes, just like a post can go crazy in a good way based on sort of the timing and what's going on in the environment, it can go crazy in a bad way too. And I think that's what happened in this case. And you're not the first person that I have heard say that all they got from a viral post was a tremendous amount of notifications to sift through.
It's more of a time suck than anything.
Right. And no new business. And, I think we're all in the business of new business, right? We want more customers.
Sure.
We also want more visibility. That's always good. It's always good to have more followers. But thinking about the amount of time it takes to respond when you do have a post that goes crazy, it'd be really nice if it did result in some some money too, right?
Sure. To
Some new
monetize it, for sure.
customers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I want people to be mindful of that. So I also mentioned I was going to bring in the humor piece. So here's my thoughts on humor. I personally get asked this all the time on, how do I be funny? How do I do this? How do I do that? And there is something to be said about humor. It does end up building trust. There's a lot of psychology that support, fun workplaces lead to retaining top talent. There's a lot that could be said about humor. When I was doing extensive speech writing for politicians, I would always steer them away from being funny, right? They're not stand-up comedians. They want to be legislators. Don't try to get up there and be funny, right? Because it could absolutely blow up in your face. The same is true when it comes to CEOs as well as leaders that they have leadership roles. Something that's funny to you might not be funny, one, to your team, and it might not be funny to your audience. So you want to be unbelievably cautious regarding that. And I mean that sincerely. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen leaders in prominent positions, they think they're funny and they are simply not funny. They're just not funny. One, I mean, it's not even that bad if it's like oh geez, almost like a groaner type funny, but
Like a dad
sometimes
joke.
like a dad joke, right? Groaner type funny. But people really need to check themselves regarding, is it offensive to your audience? A lot of leaders, there's blind spots up where they're saying something that they think might be playful when in reality it is offensive. They're alienating their community. I really want people to pause and think about that funny piece. It takes extensive work to become a humorous person. If you don't have the reps and you have not tested it time and time again, you might want to stay away from that humor piece.
Yeah, there's ways of showing your sense of humor on LinkedIn. I think a good place to do that can be in the comments. There's a little bit more freedom to showcase your personality, kind of start to test the waters there. But I agree with you. Like, there are a couple people I know. There's one guy I'm connected to, and his brand is basically his post is basically a dad joke every day, and that's just who he is. And I mean, every day I read his posts, and I'm like, oh God, they're all groaners. But that's his brand, and it's in his headline, like dad jokes or puns or something like that.
Yeah.
But you got to tread real lightly when it comes to humor. And like I said, I think sometimes you can test the waters in the comments and show your personality. And sometimes people like to use funny little gifs to do that, things like that. But ease into it.
Yeah. And, it is good to take a stand. There are times where I'll take a stand on something, but also I recognize it's not going to alienate my community. It might alienate some people, but they're not part of my community, so it doesn't matter to me. The same thing is true with humor, right? There's a way to be funny, and it could potentially, not in an offensive way, but it might alienate someone, meaning they don't have the same sense of humor, but also recognizing if it's not part of your community, it doesn't matter as much. We want to be hyper-focused on, are we truly connecting with our target market? So I appreciate everything that you mentioned regarding that. Where should leaders go from here, right? So, all right, so maybe they think to themselves, all right, we understand we need to incorporate this in our sales pipeline process. We understand there's a ton of lurkers. The overwhelming majority of people on LinkedIn, they're lurkers, they're just reading. Maybe we're starting to understand who our audience is. What other words of wisdom would you give them for, okay, here's what you need to keep doing? It's one thing to set it up, build that foundation, back to what you said in the beginning, but where do you continue to go from there?
I think one piece that's really important to remember is that LinkedIn is never done. We never kind of like cross it off our list because it's always changing. And so we talked about sort of the foundational piece. There's a couple of things I think that the leaders can do to keep it top of mind. One, set that example. Show up. Post content. We've talked about this in episodes in the past. If leadership can post at the minimum once a week, ideally more, but at the minimum once a week, they're showing up and setting an example for their organization. Making LinkedIn a priority across the board. So LinkedIn touches every single aspect within a company: sales, marketing, talent acquisition, external events. I mean, you go to a trade show, you're connecting with people that you meet. And if your profile looks like garbage, they're going to get a certain impression of your organization. So making it a priority and investing not only in their current team, but especially if they're a growing company, remembering that you might have done a LinkedIn training for your team 6 months ago, but maybe you have 50 new employees and they need to be onboarded. So keep it, sort of in the pipeline within the company so that each department is utilizing it to its, utmost degree. There's so much opportunity within each division within a company.
Yeah, that is awesome. So not just setting it and then like slowly walking away and not doing anything with it, but yes, it is constantly changing. I very much appreciate you mentioning that. I also really appreciate your time today. I know you have a ton going on, so the fact that you're willing to dive into these concepts even more, you've been on this podcast numerous times. Every time I get something out of it, and I appreciate that. And I know that you're busy. So thank you for your time today, Rachel. There's a few things I just want to highlight. I want to make sure people they just don't forget. I think there's something really important to recognize. I really appreciate you mentioning the unity in the profile, right? That's building a solid foundation. You can't mandate it, but you can make it easier based on what you had mentioned. That's absolutely true. The second point I really appreciate is don't create more work for your prospects. This is something that we do all the time. It's just we create confusion based on our messaging. So when someone goes to your profile or even sees the content you post, is there massive confusion with it? Are you making it harder on your prospects? You don't want your prospects to be confused. And then the third part is our career and business might change. And we need to make sure that we are connecting with our community as it is, not sharing messages ad nauseum to a community from a past role or a past career move, so to speak. So we need to be mindful of that. That's always changing. So again, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. If someone wants to get more information on something that you said today, Rachel, where's the best place that they can go to do that?
They can find me on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me. Just pop stories with traction in the message when you send a connection request. And I'd be happy to connect with everybody.
Awesome. I will put that in the show notes. Highly recommend people connect with Rachel and also follow Rachel's content. She has a ton of information regarding how you can be better at utilizing LinkedIn. So thank you again, Rachel. I very much appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.